On January 31st, 2022, the US Treasury published a report that shocked the world. For the first time in history, the public debt of the United States exceeded the figure of 30 trillion US dollars. And the most impressive thing about it is that this increase in the American debt shows no signs that it will stop. At the time of editing this video, the American debt had already surpassed 30 trillion 23 billion US dollars, with its value and count increasing every passing second. But how did the United States get into this situation? And what are the future prospects for the debt of the world's greatest economy that has impacts on all other countries and economies? Let's find out in this video, but before that, make sure to subscribe to this new channel to see more videos that will cover, analyze, and reveal economic aspects behind countries' successes and failures, and other interesting economic facts from around the world. The two latest world financial crises could be considered major milestones in the American public debt history. You will see that the 2008 crisis, together with the 2020 crisis, were responsible for the complete loss of notion and application of the terms public debt, monetary printing, and government spending out of control. These crises ended with any remaining good sense that could still exist when it comes to public debt. To give you an idea, according to data from the US Treasury, the public debt of the United States in December 2007 was approximately 9 trillion US dollars and represented 62% of the country's GDP. Now, at the beginning of 2022, it has reached the figure of 30 trillion US dollars, more than tripling. And to show the size of the problem, the US public debt is equivalent, according to the latest available data, to 122% of US GDP, having reached a record level of 135% in the second quarter of 2020. These numbers are really impressive, especially considering that the United States is the largest economy in the world. But how has this country's debt tripled in less than 15 years? And worse, only showing signs that it will not stop growing. Let's examine it in more detail. In 2007, the world and the United States were experiencing the height of the economic boom and the expansionist cycle of the world economy that had started after the end of the internet bubble in 2002. The indicators showed the strength of the economy. The country's inflation rate was under control and was 2.85% per annum. The unemployment rate was around 5%, demonstrating a booming economy. However, the country and the world were about to experience the largest economic crisis since the Great Depression of 1929, which would have profound effects on the country's public debt. In 2008, the subprime crisis would strike the country, shaking the entire American and world financial markets. The heart of the capitalist system would suffer the largest shock since 1929, and the stock market would collapse, having not been seen for a long time. Big companies and historic banks like Lehman Brothers would go bankrupt. The American government would find itself at a crossroads, having to let everything sink without knowing the consequences of this, or else intervening and doing everything to save those responsible who defrauded and manipulated the entire financial system, but now could not bear the losses alone from the overdose of financial leverage. Faced with this situation, and thanks to the powerful lobbies in the US Congress, it would start the largest financial rescue package and the largest money printing policy in history until then. The US Treasury and the FED, the US Central Bank, would together initiate several government interventions to save the economy. Among other measures would be implemented the reduction of the US interest rate, the FED fund, to close to 0%, massive printing and injection of dollars into the financial system through QE, quantitative easing, packages and more packages of fiscal stimulus to authorize the US Treasury to spend approximately 500 billion US dollars. The practical consequence of all these measures was an economy, a Congress, and a society increasingly dependent on the use of public money and endless indebtedness. In the following years, the American public debt would go from 9 trillion US dollars in 2007 to 23 trillion US dollars in December 2019, and would go from 62% of GDP to more than 106%. But those numbers would still be incredibly small and irrelevant compared to what would happen from 2020 onwards. In 2020, the world would see that there are no limits to governments. Simply all barriers existing until then about money printing and public debt would be broken. The health and financial crisis that began in 2020 would make the FED exponentially increase the amount of money into circulation. The FED would start to create and print money like never before through the M1, an economic and monetary measure. This monetary aggregate would increase 4 times in just 2 months and 5 times in 2 years. In addition, the US Treasury spending would increase public debt by 30%, from 23 trillion US dollars to more than 30 trillion US dollars, causing debt as a percentage of GDP to rise from 106% to more than 122%. In other words, once again the US Treasury and the FED would together repeat and increase the dose of fiscal and monetary stimulus to save the economy. To get an idea of the size of the deficit in public accounts and government spending, the US Treasury deficits for 2020 and 2021 combined reached the level of more than 5 trillion US dollars. This is equivalent to 4 entire GDPs of Brazil's economy. Unfortunately, this whole process generates extremely negative consequences and distortions. The main one is undoubtedly inflation, which ends up increasing income concentration and inequality, harming the poorest population. No wonder the level of inflation in the US has reached the highest level since 1982, and the consequences to contain all these distortions tend to only get worse and make it difficult to solve the initial problem. As an example, the FED has already signaled that it will have to raise interest rates in order to contain the escalation of inflation. But do you remember that today the US government debt is over $30 trillion? Now, imagine the government having to pay higher interest on a $30 trillion debt. Clearly, the US debt problem is just beginning, and in the coming months there will be turmoils in financial markets and the global economy. Well, now that you know a little more about how the USA's debt surpassed the incredible number of 30 trillion US dollars, help this channel by saying what other countries or economic subjects you'd like us to analyze. Leave your answer in the comments below, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our new channel for new videos where we will cover, analyze, and reveal economic aspects behind countries' successes and failures, and other interesting economic facts from around the world. Oh! And don't forget to activate the bell to stay on top of the news on this channel. We'll see you in the next one. Until then,